Alright, next we're going to be looking at the chemical senses. So we'll look at taste and smell. For both taste and smell, or gustation and olfaction respectively, their chemoreceptors respond to chemicals only when they're dissolved in an aqueous fluid, something like mucus or saliva. Let's start with the sense of smell. The organ of smell is the olfactory epithelium, which is located in the top of the nasal cavity, called the roof of the nasal cavity. When we look at this olfactory epithelium, we'll see olfactory receptor cells, which are bipolar neurons, and they actually have kind of branched dendritic endings, and they pick up on the dissolved chemical. Then there's supporting cells that surround and cushion the olfactory receptor cells, and basal cells that lie at the base of the epithelium. Think of them like stem cells. Now there's bundles of axons from the olfactory receptor cells that go upward and synapse at cranial nerve 1, or the olfactory nerve, but they synapse with a nerve called the mitral nerve, and that later will synapse with another nerve. So note here the olfactory epithelium. It's at the roof of the nasal cavity. And note the location of the olfactory bulb. It'll give you kind of a way to orient yourself for the next image. Alright, here is a closer up view of the olfactory epithelium and its innervation with the olfactory tract. And a lot of the olfactory tract is in the olfactory bulb. Let's look down at the bottom where it's labeled olfactory epithelium. The yellow cells are the olfactory sensory neurons that have the dendritic endings embedded in mucus. And so chemicals called odorants dissolve in the mucus and then can bind to receptors on the dendritic endings of the olfactory sensory neurons. Then you have the lighter supporting cells and the olfactory stem cells, which are basal cells. Now the axons of the olfactory sensory neurons go upward through the cribriform plate via the cribriform foramina, and they synapse in the olfactory bulb at a location called the glomeruli, and they synapse with the mitral cells. These are output cells that continue on to another neuron, taking this sensory information about smell towards the central nervous system. So when it comes to smell, we do need the olfactory receptors that can respond to different odor-causing chemicals, but those olfactory receptor cells must synapse with other cells in a first, second, and third order pathway that proceeds towards the olfactory bulb and then towards the brain. It's those mitral cells though that help process the odor signals and send impulses towards the brain to the olfactory cortex, which is linked to the hypothalamus, amygdala, and limbic system, which allows for emotional processing as well as conscious processing of smells. Alright, let's move on and talk about another chemical sense, which is gustation or taste. And taste is due to a chemoreceptor, or response to substances dissolved in saliva. Thermoreceptors, mechanoreceptors, nociceptors, so those other types of receptors also influence taste. You could even say that taste is highly influenced by life experience, and that 80% of taste perception is smell. Smell and texture definitely enhance or can detract from taste. And what we see when we're looking at the epithelium and kind of the structure for taste is that we have taste buds on the tongue that are located in taste bumps called papillae. Now many of these taste buds are on the tongue, but some are on the soft palate or the inner surface of the cheeks or your throat or your epiglottis. But we find these taste buds in structures called papillae. And there's different types of bumps on the tongue called papillae. There's fungiform papillae on the entire tongue surface, circumvallate papillae towards the back of the tongue, and each one of these papillae, which are bumps, contain on their sides taste buds, unless it's a filiform papillae. They have no taste buds. These taste buds, when you look at them, have a pore called a taste pore, which leads to a series of cells that include gustatory hair cells. These are going to be the gustatory receptor cells that respond to the taste dissolved in saliva. Then you have supporting cells, and you also have some basal stem cells, and they all synapse with a cranial nerve to send this information to the brain. So keep in mind that both the olfactory epithelium and the gustation receptor organ, taste buds, have similar cell structures. They have the primary receptor cell, they have supportive cells, and they have stem cells called basal cells. And it's always the primary receptor cell that is either the olfactory receptor cell or the gustatory receptor cell that processes the chemical dissolved in a fluid, whether it be mucus or saliva. When it comes to taste, there are 5 basic tastes that we can recognize: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. Sweet is caused by the dissolving of sugars or saccharine molecules, alcohols, and some amino acids in saliva. It's the dissolving of hydrogen ions that give us sour, metal ions for salty, alkaloids that give us bitter, and amino acids like glutamate and aspartate, which give us umami, which is kind of the MSG flavor. For taste, in order to be tasted, we have to have a chemical or taste it dissolved in saliva. It has to go through a taste pore and actually contact the gustatory hairs of the gustatory receptor cell. That tastant must then depolarize the membrane of the receptor cell, causing it to release a neurotransmitter to a secondary cell it synapses with, and that will generate a generator potential that goes to another cell to get a second graded potential that hopefully gives us an action potential. And the gustatory pathway is similar to the olfactory pathway. It's going to go from a cranial nerve towards the brain, up the brain stem, to the thalamus, which is our kind of gateway to the brain. It's our relay station. But instead of going to the olfactory cortex, this information for taste will go to the gustatory cortex in the insula. But it's also linked to the hypothalamus and limbic system, just like the olfactory cortex. So that gives us an appreciation of taste, and oftentimes also can help us remember the way things taste. Also keep in mind that the vagus nerve is able to transmit information from the epiglottis and lower pharynx about food, but to a much lesser degree than cranial nerve 7, which is the facial nerve, and cranial nerve 9, which is the glossopharyngeal nerve, that carry impulses from taste buds at the tongue to the medulla and further up the brainstem. So here is that pathway for gustation. So we're going from the tongue, up the brainstem, through the medulla, where there's some special nuclei, up to the thalamus, and out to the gustatory cortex. We can also look at some disorders of the chemical senses, like agagia, which is loss of taste, unsonant fits or olfactory hallucinations that are generally unpleasant, like the smell of rotting meat. This is something that someone with a seizure or common seizures may experience before one, and lets them know that they're about to have a seizure. And then anosmias are loss of smell. Alright, next we're going to be looking at the ear and how it helps with hearing and balance. So make sure to come back for that video.